of this computer. Great. Oh, I'm so happy you reminded me. Okay. So we are resilient, emotional skills beyond Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. I'm Meri McCoy Thompson, CEO of Dovetail Learning.
Oh, we're starting over, right? Yes, and I'm Chuck Fisher, Executive Director. So glad you're all here to join us in this discovery.
And in case you missed it, we are definitely recording this webinar, so we'll be sharing it out with everyone afterwards, as well as sharing the slides. So happy to do that. And just before we go any further, I just want to take the moment to appreciate you. Thank you for being you. We know that you have a lot on your plate. This world is filled with so much, especially right now. Thank you for handling all the challenges that come up and for taking care of the people around you. And thank you for caring. We know you wouldn't have joined us today on our webinar if you weren't doing all those things. And a little bit about myself. I have been the CEO of Dovetail Learning for about 4 years. I have worked in nonprofits in education and healthcare my whole career in all around the world. And currently I am the mother of 2 children and one soon to be son-in-law. And I'm also the caregiver, along with my siblings, of 2 aging parents, and I have some kitties. So that fills me with love and joy, and it helps me to empower others to live their best life.
I'm Chuck. My background is as a psychologist and counselor. I've been at Dovetail for 12 years, managing and executive directoring. And this image here is just an image of how much I am moved by humanity and the enormity of our world. Meri, could just click a couple through. This is about creating a world that works for all of us. And it's really about children. So click again. I grew up overseas and lived in a number of different countries, and children just are what my life is about. I worked in schools for 25 years as a school counselor. Click again. These are my grandkids. I want to make the world a better place for them. And then lastly, I've got one shot of me when I was 3 years old in the Philippines with a monkey on my head. I may talk about that later.
And just so a little housekeeping, feel free to use the question and answer or the chat as you wish. We're going to have a few times where we're going to ask you to put some things in the chat. And because Chuck and I are doing this together, hopefully we'll be able to monitor the things that are coming up. So Dovetail Learning, our mission is to strengthen the resilience in adults and children. And our vision is to create a world of kind, connected human beings. We do this by creating open educational resources that you can download and use for free. We have a lot of digital resources on our website. You can adapt them for use in your community. All we ask is that you give attribution and that you collaborate and share back things that you've created with our work, and share alike all of the work that you use as that includes Dovetail Learning's work, We Are Resilient. We ask that you use the same OER license. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional skills to cultivate meaningful connection, because we know that ultimately that is what we're all hardwired to want to do. And we also know Brene calls that out so eloquently in her work. So we're going to start by acknowledging Brene's wonderful contribution, and then talk about how the We Are Resilient approach can provide specific emotional skills that can help us maybe go a little bit beyond what Brene has talked about in her work. We're also going to talk a little bit about what can get in the way of resilience, as well as talk about several emotional skills that can help us center ourselves. So before we go any further, I really want to just say thank you, Brene, for the wonderful work that you've done, and ask you all and who are watching, what are your favorite takeaways from Atlas of the Heart? Please just put them in the chat. For myself, I know that This book really reinforced for me the importance of naming emotions. That's part of our work, but she went into it in such detail with such beautiful words. And of course, her story is on HBO and the other ways that the podcast and other ways she talks about it. She also talks about how we shape our experience through language, also a really important concept in our work as well. But she also just talks about it in such a way that just fills me with understanding at a deeper level. And what was new for me was what all those words mean. She talks about her 87 emotions and experiences in detail, and it was really fun to dive into that and learn more about it. So if anybody else has any other takeaways, we'd love to hear them. Just put them in the chat.
I'll just say while they're coming in that, wow, just the idea of what gets in the way of us being able to have meaningful connections, which I just read the last chapter of the book this morning, and it's just so powerful to see the near term things that get in the way and keep us from just having those relationships that we so want.
Yeah, her concept of near enemies is really priceless from that perspective. Yeah, totally agree. So JP Price talks about being able to understand the many ways we have emotions beyond mad, sad, etc. I so agree with that. I'm really working on being more granular with the way I describe my emotions and trying not to use mad, sad if I can help it. Yeah, Nicole talks about that too. There's a single quote in the middle of the book that felt life-changing, knocked my socks off in the bookstore when I browsed it. Something I never do. Yeah. Naming our emotions. Yeah. Emotional granularity. Yes. So looking forward to reading the whole book. Yeah. It takes a long time to get through. Brene talks about in her podcast with her sisters how great it is to do with a team. That's something that I'm doing now. And I have to say, it's taken us like 5 months because there's so much to discuss, but there's a lot to talk about. If you can talk about it with other people, it really enhances our enrichment. Yeah. Learning all the.
Super helpful, not only in that group with Mary, but my wife and I are reading it together, and we'll read a paragraph or a page and just talk for 10 minutes about how that, works inside of us. It's a wonderful thing to do with a partner.
Yeah, so anyone you can talk about with the book we talked about. Yeah. So, and the audiobook, yeah, it has a lot of stories. So if you have time and interest in audiobooks, I totally agree with you. So we wanted to do this work in connection with Brene's book, partly just to honor the great things that she's done and to just for ourselves look into more detail about how her work intersects with ours. And so we're excited about sharing that with you today. So continue to add your thoughts as you go through to think about it. We're going to start talking a little bit more about we are resilient. Now that we can name our emotions, the question for me as I was reading this beautiful book was, what's next? Okay, so I understand, the difference between jealousy and envy, but what do I do about that when I have those feelings? And how do we cultivate meaningful connection? Like, okay, where's the how-to here? So Brene talks about this in her very last chapter, and she has a section on the 3 things that she's talking about that she feels is important to do. There's 3 sets of skills: grounded confidence, the courage to walk alongside, and storied stewardship. We are resilient. Our approach, which we developed over the last several years, talks about our centering skills, which are similar to grounded confidence, but I think we'll give you some tools and insights about how to do that in a very specific way. We also have a set of skills called connecting skills and collaborating that we're not going to have time to talk about today. You can join some of our other trainings, and we're also going to have another webinar about Brene Brown and how this work intersects in September. So we'll have more of an opportunity to look at our connecting skills at that time. So before we dive into We Are Resilient, let's talk a little bit about resilience, what it is. Brene is very good at defining her terms, and I feel like that's a really helpful thing for all of us. So resilience is simply the ability to adapt and respond to challenges effectively. There's 2 important concepts for our perspective, is that just acknowledging our resilience will be higher or lower in different situations. So we could be going along doing specific things, and then we get that phone call, someone walks into our room, something happens, and suddenly we're off. we're triggered, we're feeling, and so we feel like we have very low resilience. That can just happen in a second. And then also the contrary, we can kind of feel off and we can do some certain things and suddenly our resilience can feel higher. So just to know that that's a normal ebb and flow in life. And even if you practice all of our skills and our approach really strongly, you're never going to take away some of that ebb and flow. So just to know that's a normal, natural human thing. And then also our resilience can be strengthened through the practice of specific skills. And those skills are what we teach and we talk about. So just to know that there is a way to get it stronger, and that's what we're working on. We also want to acknowledge that resilience is an ordinary superpower. It does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of being human. And we named our approach We Are Resilient because we believe we all have it. We know we all have it. And we just think it's joyful to acknowledge that at the beginning. So what can get in the way of resilience? Why don't Chuck, you take that away?
Well, yeah, I mentioned it earlier. It's one of the things that moves me so much, and something that we dove into deeply as we developed this approach. Slide. Uh, Brene Brown calls it armoring up. We have things that happen, and we develop armor to protect ourselves, protect our psychological safety. And We Are Resilient brings that into more focus in a different way. So let's take a look at that. We've got a couple of slides on the normal stress triggers that occur in our life. So we all can go along doing just fine, as Meri was saying. We have a stress event, we have a reaction. Well, we call those protective patterns. Our armoring patterns are protective patterns. They actually protect us. They protect our psychological safety. But of course, then we have an emotional reaction, which can peak, take time to calm down. Often there's a depletion afterwards. We can call it losing our cool. Slide. And we also look at how do we manage that. So if we're thinking about cultivating meaningful connection, that meaningful connection isn't happening for me when I'm triggered. There's all kinds of ways that I get in the way of myself with someone I dearly love or a colleague I want to work with. And so we use this management curve here by noticing our protective patterns, noticing the way we armor, and then having wonder and assessment about, what am I doing and what's in the way, and then choosing resilient skills. And we're going to talk about how those resilient skills, specific skills, can calm us down, bring us back to center so we can keep our cool. So as I said, we call these protective patterns. We're going to go through these now. And we have 6 protective patterns. Protective patterns are we call also reactive resilience. It's how we react to the world. And we developed dropped down to a list of these 6 after exploring many. I think we had over 25 or 30 that we distilled into these 6 of the things we all do. We distrust and we're hyper vigilant and we hyper caretake for someone else. We avoid things. All of us do that. We defend and get defensive, and then we can be attacking. And we want to open this up to helping you inquire of yourself. Well, which is your style? Are you more on the avoiding end or more on the attacking side? And as we know in our work with our team and many other teams, healthcare teams and educators, everyone has sort of styles that we lean into and our first styles to go after. Now let's take avoiding as an example. We'll just do a little spotlight on avoiding, and then we'll look at all of them and give you a chance to weigh in on which one are yours. So avoiding, we call it withdrawing and retreating. It's what I do when I don't, I have something that's maybe difficult to deal with and I'm not up for it today. We can avoid using toxic positivity, just pretending like everything's fine when it's not. Numb our emotions. All of our addictive behaviors are avoiding behaviors, including shopping, overeating, being a workaholic, etc. And then in every one of our protective patterns, because they are protective, they help us. Um, we want to explore how they can help. So if I avoid something, it can help to de-escalate. It can give me the time and space between when something happens. If I avoid it for a little while, it can de-escalate and then I can come back to it and address it. It creates a safe place, keeps us protected from harm, and it avoids perpetuation of other trauma. But we also know it can harm. So our protective patterns are reactive patterns. They get in our way. They are armoring. And let's look at a couple of those. So first of all, they shut down our emotional system. When we avoid, we're primarily avoiding our emotions. It prevents lasting solutions, keeps us alone, reduces connection. That opposite of that wonderful thing we're exploring today, which is meaningful connection. Next, Mary. So we'll just go through each of these just very briefly. Um, distrusting. How does distrusting help me? Well, it helps me when I'm, in a place that feels unsafe, and if I distrust um, being in that space, it keeps me safe. I was like, I don't want to go there. If I distrust something that I'm working on, it helps me work on it harder. But also, it creates a doubt about myself. So distrusting is about being curious about how am I using distrust either against myself or as a protective factor. Hypervigilance, if I'm curious about, am I on constant high alert? Of course, constant high alert is something I had to do as a child. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I had to be hypervigilant to know where my dad was at every minute so I wouldn't get clobbered. And so hypervigilance has a reason. We all use hypervigilance all the time when there's something really important that we need to track. Next. Hyper, oops, a little too fast. Back one more. Got hyper caretaking and avoiding. So hyper caretaking then is how do I over prioritize others? Hyper caretake. We're all love to be caretakers. It's helpful to be a caretaker, but to be a hyper caretaker is often at the detriment of myself. And then avoiding, we talked about where is it that I withdraw and retreat. And then the last two are defending and attacking. One of my strengths is defending. I can get very defensive, especially with my primary partner, who's my wife. And she wants to tell me something, and I'm just like, put up my hands, and as it says here, act like I'm being criticized or judged, which I may not be at all, but it's a learned behavior that, again, I got from my family of origin. And then attacking is to be on the offense. Sometimes we can protect ourselves by being on the offense first, make sure nobody can get under our armor, and attacking can, of course, also get in the way of our relationships. So these are the six. Mary's going to put a poll out, and what we'd like you to do is just pop into the poll.
So I'm afraid I don't have the poll ready.
Oh, we don't have the poll. Okay, tell you what. Let's just have you type it into the chat. Type into your chat right now. Which of these feels like sort of the one that you call on the most when you need to protect yourself psychologically? Oh, great. Hypervigilance, avoiding, defending, avoiding, flight. We got a lot of avoiders and defenders in our group. And isn't that just so common? And hypervigilance. Thank you all for putting in your protective patterns. The beauty of this is that we get to normalize how we are and who we are. When I see that these are protective patterns that actually were born in me to help me stay safe, it notches it down a little bit, because don't we all feel bad sometimes when we have a reactive pattern? And this is a way of normalizing our human condition. Mary, you want to add anything to that?
I would just add that Brene calls it armoring up, which has a great physical feeling for me. I like that understanding of armoring up, but it fails to take into account, for me at least, that they are helpful and that it is something we should do at times. And that our approach is really just about helping you notice, is this helpful at this moment or not? And it will change in every situation and with different people. So just think about it as sometimes, this is something that's helpful and sometimes it's something that's not. And, your goal is just to notice. That's really what we're asking people to do. So notice your protective patterns, whether you're arming or up, and whether they're helping or hurting. Okay, now we'll talk about what emotional skills can help us with grounded confidence, as Brene calls it, or resilience, as we call it. And we're going to focus today on our centering skills. They're for personal resilience. That's what most people think of as resilience, though at We Are Resilient, we talk about 5 different types of resilience. So if you look through our materials or take other training courses, you can learn about our other types of resilience. But this personal resilience is part of how we create the world we want. The power of centering, it's so strong. And if we're curious about it, we understand it reduces our stress, it improves our well-being, we can parent more effectively, we can be the people we want with those that we love, and we just can connect and collaborate in a stronger way. It also helps us manage our stress curve, as Chuck has showed you this before. Our protective patterns come in, we can be curious about it. These are one of our resilient mindsets that we can also talk about in our future webinars. We wonder and assess, and then we have this choice, which is another resilient mindset. We can choose the resilient skills that we're going to talk about. The 6 resilient skills that we have in our approach are noticing myself, breathing mindfully, letting go, finding gratitude, positive reframing, and nurturing myself. And since this is only 45 minutes, we don't have a chance to go into depth in all 6 of these. So we've just chosen 4. I think the 4 that maybe connect the most to Brene's work, and we'll talk about that as we go on. So the first one is noticing myself. And honestly, as I was reading Atlas of the Heart, I kept thinking, this is noticing myself like in the deepest way, right? I'm learning so much about how to notice myself in the deepest way. Our tagline here is pause, what's the cause? It's just like stop, pause, and think about, okay, how am I really feeling, right? That's, if we're curious about it, is what am I noticing, sensing, and feeling? Which of these 87 experiences and emotions are really happening in my body? Or what thoughts are the words I'm saying to myself? What emotions do I have? What maybe reactions am I having? That protective patterns, the armor, as she calls it. Really, what is my state of being? That's what noticing myself is. And it is amazing how that skill, just doing that, actually helps center us. The other 6 skills are also useful, but just doing one skill, noticing myself, can get us into a better place. As I said, Brene talks about 87 human emotions and experiences. She is a real fan of emotional granularity, being very specific. Like, do I feel bored or do I feel regret here? And being aware which of these things are happening within me. And noticing myself, the more we can get granular, the more effective the skill can be used for us. Atlas of the Heart gives us so many tools to distinguish these emotional signals, so we can have that nuance when we're doing pause, what's the pause. Now, one thing to realize is our bodies send us these emotions and give us these emotions, and they tell us information. They're emotional intelligence that we get along the way. One thing, for example, anger, it's just telling you an important boundary or value has been violated. When we're joyous, it signals there's something that I value and love. And all of our emotions are giving us signals that we can then use as information when we're trying to cultivate that meaningful connection that we want. So listening and paying attention and knowing the different signals are really important. Here's another list.
Let me just jump in for a second because this is so important. So on that last slide, what we're talking about is emotional intelligence, which literally is the intelligence of our emotions. Our body gives us these emotions so we can get more information. And what we're inviting us all to look at is, what is that information and how can it inform us?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome. Thanks for jumping in. Here's another list of emotions, and this is from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And one of the things I like about this emotion is it has what are commonly considered negative emotions on the left and broad emotions on the right. But one way to think about this is that the broad emotions are generative, and they give us creativity, and we're filled with a lot of ideas around it. And the emotions on the left are narrow. There's a specific cause that maybe it's helpful for us to get into. So if we're annoyed, what are we annoyed about? Let's discover that. Let's find out about that and learn about it. So maybe we won't be annoyed next time, or maybe we have to change something. If we're fatigued or drained, is there something happening in our life we want to change? So they're narrow emotions. So thinking about it as it's okay to have a lot of narrow emotions. It's okay to have broad emotions. We want to have a spectrum of both so we can have things that both generate in our life and also help us create the world we want by using some of those narrow emotions to make changes if it's useful or helpful for us.
And to be informed by those narrow emotions, they guide us to know what's off
And
base.
yeah, absolutely. The other thing about emotions is that sometimes we block them. I know for myself, I've been in situations where I just was working so hard at doing things that I was trying not to pay attention about what's really happening in my life.
Mary,
Right.
I think that's called an avoiding protective pattern.
And I believe me, it's one of my protective patterns. But when I do that, it's because I have the sense that riding the wave of emotions can be scary. And the good thing for me is if we lean in and ride the wave, we learn from experience that the wave ends and we can walk. So learning how to ride the waves of all the emotions that come is part of just growing and being in touch with ourselves and being able to center ourselves. And finally, just that there are practices that we can do in very small ways. We call these micro practices that you can learn if you're not in the habit of noticing yourself. Like just take a small moment when you're in the shower or the bathroom, or maybe if you've had an intense moment. Okay, that just happened. How do I feel? What's going on? Sometimes in the morning, like, what's going on? I'm just waking up, or I'm having my coffee, I'm thinking about. So, building in small moments throughout your day makes it a habit. And the more we can have those habits, the more the skills available to us when we really need it. We're like, okay, I really need
And
it.
as Mary said earlier, we call it pause. What's the cause? Pause. Just take that pause.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, check.
So the next centering skill we call breathing mindfully. So we notice ourselves. What can we then do to shift ourselves? Well, the tagline here is breathe deeply, feel it completely. So breathing mindfully, when we get curious about how our breath works, we can ask the questions, where in my body do I feel my breath? Where literally? What is the sensation that I feel? Um, and we can then breathe into the area of our heart to calm ourselves and trust our heart and rest our minds. So let's take just a moment and experience what that might be like or what that is like. So I want to just invite everybody to simply pause. If you're comfortable, let your eyes rest or close, and then notice your breath. As the breath flows in and the breath flows out, just notice the sensation inside your body. The flow of the air in through the nostrils, the exhalation out of the mouth, and the full-bodied sensation as the lungs rise and fall and the belly drops and fills. And just give gratitude for the fact that our bodies are breathing every moment, all the time. And when you're ready, wiggle your fingers and wiggle your toes and bring yourselves back.
I'm
And
so relaxed.
notice what you notice. What did you say, Mary?
So relaxed.
Well, it's amazing what we can experience in 10 to 15 seconds of dropping into the breath. And it is, of course, a practice. Um, so we invite you to practice and understand the power of the science behind the breath, that it's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems working when we're under stress. They're working against each other. When we bring in the breath, all of a sudden they can bring our self-regulation in. Of course, on the sympathetic side, the stress side, there's anxiety and the body's producing cortisol. And when we self-regulate, we get calmer and our body starts producing DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, which is the anti-stress hormone, which is so good for our immune system and the rest of us.
And we know a lot of you may already have breathing practices, but just to invite, if you do have a breathing practice, to really feel it in your body and to do it on it. And if you don't have a breathing practice, to just try one. Just a minute or two a day can make a huge difference in learning how breath can.
One of my, go ahead and switch the slide. One of my micro practices uh, is when I go to a mall. You've all been to shopping malls, I'm sure. Maybe there's someone on the call that hasn't, but malls are so frenetic. There's so much activity and intensity and noise and people. And I'll find a bench and I'll stop and I'll just breathe for 1 minute. And it completely self regulates me. Like all changes. So on your way to work at a stoplight, before or after an intense moment, of course, when we start to go to sleep, it's wonderful to bring ourselves into the awareness of our somatic uh, body felt sense, and using the breath is one of the best ways to do that.
Great example. I think I need it next time I go to a mall. So the next skill, the third skill we'll talk about today, is letting go. And the tagline here is set free what burdens me. And when we do that, when we're curious about it, it's what would be helpful for me to let go of. That's everything from expectations, attachment to an outcome, judgments, what is not in my control, or is there a larger value or goal that will help me let go of this issue? And for myself, it's all of these things that I have to work on letting go of. Just an example, today I sent out a newsletter and the very first letter I had typed was wrong. And so it went out to everybody incorrectly. And I was so proud of this until I noticed that that was wrong. And I'm like, okay, well, that was done. I have to let go. It's in the past, right? There's also things of right now, my stepfather is in hospice. And of course, there's a lot of family drama around all the issues around hospice. And I'm just trying to let go of other people's needs, other people's my attachment to any outcome, and just being there for what is the biggest goal right now, right? And who can we support in the biggest way? And of course, when you're dealing with that kind of situation, there's a lot out of our control. And then there's judgments. There's a lot of things that happen around us in the world and politics. It's really easy to get into a judgment place about that and just say, okay, how can I let go of my judgments? Expectations, hope that when I finish something, my husband's going to have dinner ready, and I go out and he hasn't even thought about dinner. It's like, okay, always is what's the larger goal? I want to cultivate that meaningful connection. So starting to attack my husband, which is maybe how I would have handled it early on in our relationship, was not going to be helpful. So just setting free what burdens me and letting go of all the things we can. Now, all of our centering skills are not meant to be used in every situation. We call them a menu or a basket because choose which one works for a specific situation. Because there are definitely things that we're not asking you to let go of. There are definitely things that you should hold on to and you should stay with. But just know that it's always there as a skill that you can use. And understanding, I know in our culture, sometimes it's like the persistent wins. And if you just stay with it and hold on to it, you're doing the right thing. But real strength is not in control. It's knowing when to let go. And that's a very tricky thing sometimes. And just understanding all the things that are outside of our control. There's so many things. And yet we think, oh, if I just, can make that person happy, my life will be good. Or if I can change that person's reaction, or if I can, predict what will happen next. My husband loves to try to predict what will happen next. And I'm always like, oh, it's outside of my control. I'm not going to predict that. So thinking about what we can help and what we can do, and only letting go of focusing on some of those other things.
Mary, I'm thinking about the words that Brene uses, grounded confidence. Um, and everything we've talked about so far helps me have that. And letting go is a big one because when I'm attached to something, my mind is engaged, and I'm not grounded. I'm like, oh, it's got to be this way or that way or the other way. And as soon as I can let it go, my all of my energy drops. I can feel my feet on the ground, and I can be confident just to be.
So we have a great question here. How do you keep from confusing letting go with avoidance? And it's a great question because it's like, okay, I'm trying, am I avoiding? Is that not helping? Is that helping? Or am I letting go? And I think for me, a lot of it goes back to that original on that graph that Chuck showed, like, where are we in that? So am I letting go of something or am I avoiding something in the sense of, is it helping me or not helping me? I don't actually care what it's labeled, but am I doing it as a way that is helping me? And I can step back and notice that. And that's the bigger question. So if I'm thinking about all the issues around hospice, right, sometimes it's definitely avoiding. And then I have to, okay, now I have to go back to that issue and I have to talk to this person about that particular thing. Or sometimes it's, okay, that thing I'm just going to let go of and I don't actually have to return to it. And then sometimes, so for me, it's less important about the label than whether it's helping or hurting. I don't know if you have something else to add around that, Chuck.
Well, I'm thinking of letting go as I experience it differently than avoiding. If I'm avoiding something, I'm actually still attached to it. Um, and letting go gives me space. Um,
Yeah, that's true too. And I think part of the question is, do I need to be attached to it? Because sometimes I need to stay attached to it. It's something I'm supposed to do. And I
that's
just,
right. That's right. There's a lot of important things that we need, or at least we feel that we need to stay attached to.
that's right. Right. So thank you for that great question, Roman. And just a reminder with letting go, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the end, right? And so maybe you had an argument with someone and you can't go back and change that, but you can change the ending. So maybe you can let go of some of the things that they said that were hurtful and have a different conversation and enter it into a new way. So just a reminder that that's always available for us. And the micro practice, my micro practice here, I actually have this little shame suitcase. And you can imagine where I got this idea from Shame Suitcase, Brene Brown, because she talks so beautifully about shame and how it can be hurtful to us. And sometimes that shame suitcase fills up. Right now, I think there's 1,300 emails in my inbox. So boy, that shame suitcase starts bulging. And so one of my micro practices is just taking stuff out of that shame suitcase, okay, and letting it go, right? Like, who cares if I have 13? It doesn't mean I'm a bad person, just means I'm busy and I haven't gotten to it yet, right? So just thinking about things and not letting things turn into shame, right? And having that as part of our micro practice. I don't know if you have any micro practices around letting go that you'd like to share, Chuck.
Well, I let go by going and sitting in nature. So I get filled up, overwhelmed sometimes, and if I sit in nature, it all just finds its own place.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Okay.
So the last centering skill we're going to do today is positive reframing, and how does let's be curious about how positive reframing can help us with our connectedness, how it can bring us into a grounded sense of confidence, and so being curious. Um, let's shift that slide. Um, is about how can I see the glass half full versus half empty. And I love the example that you just gave, Mary, of 1,300 emails in your inbox, because it can be like, oh, overwhelmed and oh, I'm a bad person because I didn't get there. Or a reframe would be, wow, I've got 1,300 emails in my inbox. I wonder which ones of those are going to, just open up the world.
I
Uh,
do try to have that perspective on the days that I want to go get to them.
Right. But this idea of change of the view for a new you. We change how we think, and we know how critically important our words are. Every word we say to ourselves impacts us. The words we say out loud impact not only us, but everyone else. So we can shift a mistake into a learning, an obstacle to an opportunity, a negativity into a misunderstanding. And this image here of the clouds is, we can see the clouds as one thing and reinterpret it in a more positive way. So, get this wonderful quote here from Brene Brown's book. Language, so we're talking about words, language transports us to a universe of new choices and second chances by shifting how I speak and think and word, a universe where we can share the stories of our bravest and our most heartbreaking moments with each other in a way that builds connection. And, I just have learned this over and over and over that the power of vulnerability is the power of connection. And what you shared, Mary, about your mom and dad, and Michelle wrote in the thing over here, I guess it was Michelle or someone else, Kalia, thank you, touched by your loss. When you share something that's vulnerable, it helps me to be vulnerable. It helps me to be human. And language, our languaging, our speaking our stories, which gets back to being a story keeper with ourselves and with others, helps us to positively reframe our world and our universe.
For me, this is how I came up with this micro practice. What is the most empowering story I can tell myself about this situation? It goes back to the language. And I know that when I'm sitting with people and we're working through really hard, deep things where people are very deeply hurt and they're like so mad at this person or that person, um, just thinking about is there any positive reframe we can put on that? Can they tell themselves a story in a real positive, empowering way? And it just helps work through some of the pain and opens up possibilities in a new way.
And we all know what it feels like to be in a negative spin, especially if we're critical about ourselves. Anyone on the call have a highly developed inner critic? Uh, it's part of our human condition, especially in Western culture. And the trick is to shift the inner critic into a compassionate, fair witness so we can witness ourselves in a positive reframe, have empathy for ourselves and self compassion, all of the beautiful skills that emotional intelligence tells us are important.
Absolutely.
So, going back to this full set of centering skills on the next slide, um, uh, why don't you go ahead and type in again in the chat which of these skills feels like something you want to do more of? We didn't talk about finding gratitude and nurturing ourselves. Those are two also critical skills. And of course, we go into those in great depth in our training. But just pop in to the chat here. Um, Great. Noticing myself. Yes, that's such a good one.
I know for me, I have to say, when I started doing this work, I'm like, oh, I notice myself. I'm this, that, and the other thing. But it's amazing how often, because I'm also so achievement oriented, that I would like skip over noticing myself and say, well, that wasn't important.
Reframing, breathing, gratitude, nurturing, letting go, letting go, letting go. Uh, Thank you all for playing with us here, letting go and finding gratitude. I need to practice more reframing. Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, if when we can name these, they can be brought right into our uh, essential groundedness to help us come home to ourselves. We get off balance, the centering skills can bring us back home to our
And
center to be on balance.
I want to encourage you. We have posters available on our website. You can buy the poster if you want, but you can also just go and download it, print it for free, and post it somewhere, because physical reminders of what this is really helpful as you're trying to develop micro practice. So just the tip is meaningful connections begins with noticing our protective patterns, armoring up, as we talked about, and then practicing some centering skills for grounded confidence. And then this next session, we'll talk about practicing connected skills. And yes, you will definitely get a copy of the slides. When? Yeah, I'm not sure. Hopefully today or tomorrow. Just to give you a sense of what the whole approach is. So we have the cultural patterns, which we've not talked about today. That's how we view the world. We have our protective patterns, how we react to the world. And then we have these 3 sets of skills. That's how we create the world we want. And then we also talk about 3 resilient mindsets and curiosity, choice, and courage. And they help guide us in using the patterns of skills. So if you get into the We Are Resilient approach, either through our books, through more of our training, you'll learn more about how all of these work together. And we feel like it's really a great enhancement for the work that you get through Brene Brown. Also, just wanted to say, if you're interested in teaching it to others, which we highly encourage, we say that we really need to practice it ourselves to become better. Again, the micro habits are key. Then you can model so other people can learn from you, and you can coach using curiosity, compassionate questions, and encouragement. We really believe that we have to do this ourselves in order to make the world a better place before we try to share it with others. 2 tips I want to leave you with, really good things to say. I'm not my most resilient self at the moment. Just acknowledging that with others and ourselves can kind of help take us to the place we need to go. And thinking about what pattern can I honor, protective pattern perhaps, or resilient skill can I choose right now when we're in difficulty. We have a lot of resources to help you. We have upcoming training options. Both of these will be on the website as of tomorrow. They're not there quite yet, but the Connecting Skills Part 2, that will be on Monday, September 12th at 4 p.m. and our Personal Professional Resilience Circle also in September. So we'll send that information out and you can sign up then. Our website, as I said, lots of free digital resources. You can join a resilience circle, which we really recommend as a way of deepening your work, training, or webinars, and lots of materials to purchase. Chuck and I love to answer questions or get in contact with people, so please just contact us directly.
And we love for you to use our work, which is why it's an open education resource. You can download almost all of it for free right on our website.
And we're here just to create a world of kind, connected human beings. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
So great to have you join us.